Soft lies can be comfortable, but only the cold, metallic truth has the power to set your soul free forever. We aren't afraid to peel back the layers of deception and show you the world as it really is. Subscribe now for the most honest and raw storytelling on YouTube. The night my son-in-law pressed a folded cocktail napkin into my palm without looking at me, I thought he'd made a mistake. We were standing at the kitchen island during my daughter's annual 4th of July party, surrounded by neighbors and old friends, ice clinking in glasses, the smell of grilled corn drifting through the screen door. He brushed past me to refill a pitcher and left the napkin in my hand like it was nothing. I almost set it down on the counter. I almost didn't open it at all. It said, "Don't eat the cake. Don't drink anything you didn't open yourself. I'll explain tonight. Please trust me." I read it twice. Then I looked up at my son-in-law, Daniel, across the kitchen. He was laughing at something one of my daughter's colleagues had said, his hand resting easy on the counter, completely relaxed. He didn't look at me. Not once. I folded the napkin and pushed it into my shirt pocket. "My name is Gerald. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher in Raleigh, North Carolina, and when my wife, Patricia, passed from ovarian cancer 4 years ago, something in the architecture of my life quietly collapsed. We had built everything together, the house, the savings, the retirement plan, the idea of what our later years would look like. When she was gone, I didn't know what to do with any of it. My daughter, Sandra, was 41, sharp and beautiful in the way her mother had been. She'd married Daniel 8 years earlier. He was quiet, methodical, an engineer who fixed things around my house without being asked, and never once made me feel like a burden. I liked him. I trusted him in the uncomplicated way you trust someone who shows up consistently without needing praise for it. Sandra was the one I worried about sometimes, not in any way I could articulate clearly. She loved me. I believed that. But after Patricia died, she became very focused on my financial situation in a way that felt, occasionally, like something other than concern. She asked about the house more than once. She asked whether I'd updated my will. She suggested, gently but repeatedly, that managing the investments myself at my age was a lot of stress I didn't need. I told myself it was grief. I told myself she was processing her mother's death by trying to control the things that felt controllable. I'd taught enough teenagers to know that people handle loss in strange and sometimes selfish-looking ways that aren't actually selfish at all. I gave her the benefit of every doubt I had. That was my first mistake. 14 months before that 4th of July, Sandra had suggested I move in with them. She'd framed it as company for me. Safety, family closeness. Their house was large, a 5-bedroom colonial in a good neighborhood outside of Durham, and she said the guest suite on the ground floor would be mine, completely private, my own entrance if I wanted it. I'd hesitated. Daniel had said simply, "We'd genuinely like to have you, Gerald. No pressure either way." The way he said it made me believe him. So I sold my house in Raleigh, the house Patricia and I had lived in for 26 years. I netted $340,000 after closing costs and moved into the guest suite with my books, my reading chair, and a framed photograph of Patricia on the dresser where I could see it from the bed. Sandra suggested I move the bulk of the sale proceeds into a joint account she would help me manage. She said it was easier for tax purposes, easier for bill payments, easier for everything. She had a document drawn up by someone she called our family's financial planner, though I later found out this person was a notary she'd met through a friend, not a licensed advisor of any kind. I signed it at the kitchen table while she made me coffee and told me how glad she was I was there. I gave her co-access to $290,000. I kept $50,000 in my own account. I don't know why I did that. Some instinct, some small voice I didn't entirely silence. I told Sandra the remainder was tied up in a CD that hadn't matured yet. She seemed to accept that. For the first few months, everything felt fine. Sandra cooked elaborate dinners on Sundays. Daniel and I watched football. I helped them with their garden in the mornings and felt useful. I started to think maybe this had been the right decision after all, that Patricia would have been glad to know I wasn't alone in that big Raleigh house anymore. Then, in the spring, I noticed the first withdrawal. I'd set up electronic statements out of habit. $18,000. Transferred to an account I didn't recognize. I asked Sandra about it that evening. She explained it quickly and smoothly. It was a home repair escrow fund, she said, for the roof replacement they'd been planning. She'd told me about it weeks ago. Didn't I remember? She said it with a light laugh, the kind that made me feel like the confusion was mine. I didn't remember her mentioning it, but I also wasn't certain she hadn't. I let it go. Over the next 6 months, I noticed 4 more transfers. Each time I asked, Sandra had an explanation. Furnace replacement, property tax installment, a short-term loan to her friend that was already being paid back. Each explanation was specific enough to sound plausible and delivered with enough mild impatience that I felt, each time, like I was being unreasonably suspicious of my own daughter. Daniel, during this period, was quieter than usual. Not cold, never unkind, but I caught him sometimes watching Sandra during dinner with an expression I couldn't quite name. Careful, maybe. Alert in the way of someone who has seen something they haven't yet decided what to do with. It was in early June that he started leaving things for me. First, it was a printed article, left on my reading chair, about elder financial abuse in family settings. No note. I assumed it was accidental, that he'd set it down and forgotten it. Then a week later, a sticky note on my coffee mug in the morning. Have you checked your statements recently? All of them? He was gone before I came downstairs. Sandra had already left for work. I checked. In the 14 months since I'd given Sandra co-access to the account, $187,000 had been withdrawn. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and just looked at that number for a long time. The ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler hissed against the grass. I thought about Patricia. I thought about what she would say. She had always been the one in our marriage who saw people clearly, not cynically, but clearly. She used to tell me that love and honesty were not the same thing, and that confusing them was how good people got hurt. I had not understood that fully, I think, until that morning at the kitchen table. I was still sitting there when Daniel came home early from work. He didn't seem surprised to find me there. He sat down across from me, looked at the laptop screen, and said, "How much?" $187,000, I said. He nodded like he'd already known it would be something like that. He was quiet for a moment, and then he told me everything. He'd started noticing irregularities 8 months earlier. Small things at first receipts he found that didn't match what Sandra told him. A second email account she didn't know he'd seen, a phone call he'd overheard in the driveway that she ended quickly when he came inside. He'd hired a private accountant 6 weeks ago, quietly, to review what he could access without tipping Sandra off. The accountant had found evidence of 2 additional accounts in Sandra's name alone, opened after I moved in, with a combined balance of just over $200,000. I wanted to have everything documented before I said anything, Daniel said. To you, to anyone. I didn't want it to be my word against hers. I asked him why he hadn't come to me sooner. He looked at the photograph of Patricia on the kitchen counter. Sandra had moved it there from my room one afternoon, saying it brightened up the space, and he said, "Because she's your daughter, and I wasn't sure what you'd believe." That was fair. That was painfully fair. The 4th of July party was 8 days away. Daniel told me Sandra had invited a notary she knew to attend casually, as a guest. He'd found a document template on her computer, a deed of transfer for the house, partially filled in with my name. He believed she was planning to get me to sign something at the party, maybe after a few drinks, maybe framed as something routine. "The cake," I said. He looked at me. "You're worried about the cake." He was quiet for a moment. "I found something in the bathroom cabinet last month," he said carefully. "A prescription bottle that wasn't prescribed to either of us." I looked it up. High doses can cause confusion, memory problems, disorientation. I threw it away. But I don't know if she has more. I don't know what she's planning exactly. I just know I don't want you eating or drinking anything you didn't see opened and poured yourself. I felt something move through me that was not quite fear and not quite grief. It was closer to the sensation of a floorboard giving way beneath your foot that split second when you realized the ground was never as solid as you believed. I asked Daniel what he wanted to do. "I have an appointment with a lawyer on the 5th, he said. "I want you to come with me. I've already spoken with him once. He handles financial elder abuse cases." He said, "With the documentation you have strong grounds for recovery and potentially criminal charges." "And Sandra?" Daniel looked at his hands on the table. He was 44 years old. He had been married to my daughter for 8 years. I understood in that moment what this was costing him too. "I think she's been planning this for a long time," he said. "Since before Patricia got sick, maybe. I don't know. But I know that whoever I thought she was, this is who she actually is. And I can't." He stopped. Started again. "I can't protect you both. So I'm choosing you." I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't, entirely. The party was on a Saturday. About 40 people, neighbors, Sandra's coworkers, a few of her friends I recognized from over the years. Daniel manned the grill. I moved through the crowd the way I usually did at these things, talking about the heat and the Braves and whether the neighborhood needed a stop sign at the corner of Elm and Fifth. Normal, ordinary, the way a July afternoon is supposed to feel. Sandra was radiant. That is the word I keep coming back to. She wore a white sundress and laughed easily, and refilled people's glasses, and kissed my cheek twice, and called me daddy in that way she had since she was small that used to fill me with uncomplicated happiness. I watched her work the party, and I felt the full weight of what I was doing and what I was about to lose, and I understood for the first time that grief can run in two directions at once. Around 8 o'clock, she brought out the cake. It was a red, white, and blue layer cake with sparkler candles, and everyone gathered around, and she looked at me with that bright, familiar smile and said, "Daddy, you have to have the first piece. It's strawberry, your favorite." I said I was still full from dinner. I'd watched what I ate all evening, and I'd only drunk from the 2 beers I'd opened myself. She pressed a little. "Just a small piece. I made it for you." Daniel appeared beside me. He said he was full, Sandra. His voice was easy, not confrontational. Just there, her smile held perfectly. "Of course," she said. "We'll save you a piece for later." Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, the notary, a thin man named Gary, who Sandra introduced as just an old friend, approached me near the back patio with a folder. Sandra appeared beside him almost immediately. She said it was just some paperwork for the financial account, consolidating a couple things so they're cleaner going forward. She said it the way you say something you've rehearsed to sound unrehearsed. I looked at the first page of the document. It was a full transfer of property. My name is transferor. Sandra's name is transferee. The address of the house I was living in but did not own, which I now understood had been the point of this arrangement from the beginning. I said I'd like to have my own lawyer look at it first. Sandra's smile tightened by a fraction. "It's really just a formality, Daddy. Gary can explain anything you don't understand." "I'm sure he can," I said. "But I'd still like my lawyer to see it. I'll take a copy." I took the folder. Gary looked at Sandra. Sandra looked at me. "Of course," she said, for the second time that evening. The same 2 words, the same immaculate smile. That night, after the guests were gone and Sandra had gone to bed, I sat with Daniel at the kitchen table, and we went through everything one more time. He had copies of all the account documentation, the private accountant's report, photographs of the prescription bottle before he'd disposed of it, and screenshots of the document template he'd found on Sandra's computer. He'd been building this file for weeks. He was methodical and thorough in the way that engineers are methodical and thorough, and I thought, not for the first time, that my wife would have loved him unreservedly if she'd had the chance to see this side of him. We met with the lawyer. His name was Richard Calloway, and he had 20 years of experience in exactly these cases on the morning of July 5th. I told Daniel I didn't want Sandra to know where I was, so I said I had a doctor's appointment and took a cab. Richard reviewed everything Daniel had compiled, asked me a series of very precise questions about the timeline and the transfers, and told me that what had happened constituted financial elder abuse under North Carolina law, and that the case for both civil recovery and criminal charges was, in his assessment, substantial. He asked whether I wanted to proceed. I thought about Patricia again. I thought about the house we had lived in for 26 years, the way the light came through the kitchen window in the morning, the savings account we had built slowly and carefully together over decades of ordinary Tuesday morning choices, brown bagging lunch, skipping vacations we couldn't quite afford, buying the sensible car instead of the one we wanted. I thought about what she had built, and what it had been taken to pay for, and who had taken it. "Yes," I said, "I want to proceed." The investigation took 4 months. Sandra was not immediately aware that anything was happening, which Richard said was important. The Financial Crimes Unit of the Durham County Sheriff's Office was brought in. They subpoenaed the accounts, reviewed the transfer records, and found, in addition to what Daniel had already documented, a third account Sandra had opened using a version of my signature that had been, according to a forensic document examiner, digitally copied and altered from a form I'd signed when I moved in. She was arrested on a Tuesday morning in November. I was not at the house when it happened. Richard had advised me to stay elsewhere, and I had been staying in a rental apartment in Raleigh for 6 weeks by then, in a neighborhood close to where Patricia and I had lived, the same maple trees lining the same quiet streets. Daniel called me when it was done. He didn't say much, neither did I. There was a long pause on the phone, the kind that holds more than words can. "Are you okay?" I asked him. "No," he said. "But I will be." I believed him. Sandra pleaded guilty to financial exploitation of an elder adult, and 1 count of forgery. She was sentenced to 22 months in a minimum security facility and ordered to make full restitution. The process of recovering the money was slow and partial. Some of it had been spent, and some of it will take years, but Richard told me that the outcome was better than most cases of this kind ever reach. He said most of these cases don't make it to charges at all, because the families can't bring themselves to file, or because the evidence isn't there, or because by the time anyone realizes what's happened, the money is simply gone. I found a smaller house in Raleigh, 4 blocks from where Patricia and I had lived. Single story, good light, a backyard where I put a vegetable garden in the spring. On the mantel in the living room, I have the photograph of Patricia that Sandra had moved to the kitchen counter, without asking. The one from our trip to the Great Smoky Mountains the summer before she got sick. She's laughing at something just off camera. She looks entirely like herself. Daniel and I still talk once a week. He filed for divorce in January. He says he's managing, and from what I can tell, he is not without difficulty, but with the kind of honest steadiness that I have come to understand is simply who he is. He still drives down to Raleigh occasionally on a Sunday. We watch football, and I make the chili that Patricia used to make, and we sit in the comfortable quiet of 2 people who have been through something together and come out the other side still standing. He told me once that he was sorry it took him as long as it did to say something that he'd been afraid of being wrong, afraid of what it would cost to be right, afraid of all of it. I told him that doing the hard thing slowly is still doing the hard thing. He thought about that for a while. Then he nodded. There is something I want to say to anyone who might be hearing this story and recognizing something in it, a transfer you weren't quite sure about, an explanation that came just a little too smoothly, a document someone was in a hurry for you to sign. I am not a suspicious man by nature. I spent 31 years trying to teach young people that most of humanity's failures come from fear and confusion, and not from malice. I still believe that, mostly. But I also know now that love can be genuine and manipulation can exist inside the same person at the same time. I know that your instinct, the small voice that made you keep $50,000 in your own account, or hesitate before signing, or hold on to a folded napkin instead of throwing it away, that instinct is worth something. It is worth more than your desire to be wrong about the people you love. Listen to the people who show up quietly, the ones who leave articles on your chair and notes on your coffee mug, and press folded napkins into your hand at parties without making a scene. They may not be loud about it. They may not even be family in the way we usually mean the word. But sometimes the person who chooses you is more family than the person who was given to you. Patricia used to say that trust has to be earned, and that earning it is quiet work, the kind nobody notices except the person it's being done for. She was right about that, too. She was right about most things. I'm grateful every day that someone quiet was doing that work when I needed it most.